It is Sunday, I think. Steve, it's Sunday, right?
Yeah,
I believe it is Sunday.
all day long until it's not Sunday any longer.
Makes sense. I am Kyle Curtis. Welcome to Non-Sequitur. As always, joined by Steve McCrae, who is just spoke right there, Steve. And we have coming back with us a very special guest, one of our favorites, Dr. Joshua Bowen. Dr. Bowen, how are you?
Doing well. How you guys doing?
Excellent. We actually have a little bit of a surprise for you guys. I'm going to go through the upcoming shows, and then we're going to get to that video and tell you what you need to do after it. But so just hold on one second. Tomorrow we will be joined by Pastor Darren, who is a pastor of a very unique kind of church, one that you wouldn't think of as a church, but it is. He is the pastor of the Church of Satan. And tomorrow we will be doing something interesting because I think that everybody would have a question for somebody who claims to be a Satanist. And if that's you, then please send your questions to us on Twitter. That's at Non-Sec Show. That's NONSEQ Show. And we will ask those live. That would be a whole entire show with some questions that we have, and then you guys asking questions on your end. So it'll be a heavy involved with you guys. So come ready to participate. That's tomorrow at 8 o'clock. And then on Tuesday, we have We the People, a debate on the legalization of marijuana. We're going to not be talking about so much the medical issue because I think that everybody involved does agree to a certain extent that medical marijuana should be legal. It will be on the issue of it recreationally, and that will be with the Geek Room, Frankie Wolf and Brand the Law, and SJ, and a guest that she will be bringing. And then on Wednesday, if you thought it's been weird that we haven't had a Flat Earth show in the past 3 weeks, well, you will be happy because we will be getting back into the swing of things with Flat Earth on Wednesday at 8 o'clock. Red's Rhetoric will be taking on his screen name is like Wotan, I think, Steve.
Wonton.
Right, but he
Wotan
says
Clan.
it Wonton. Yeah, I don't know. Wotan or Wonton, one of the two, will be taking on Red's Rhetoric. That's Wednesday at 8. And then our Egyptologist, Maggie Bryson, who Dr. Bowen was so kind enough to put us in contact with, will be with us on Thursday at 8 o'clock to talk about the secrets of the Sphinx. So now that we've got that out of the way, Dr. Bowen and his wife are putting together an awesome channel. It will stem off of things that you heard with him on the last show that he was with us. And then tonight, what they're going to be doing, though, is it will be a full-time show or a full-time channel dedicated to those kind of things. And instead of me trying to explain it, I'm going to let this video do the talking for me. And then when it's over, make sure that you go and subscribe to them. We'll put the link down in the description. And their first video, I believe, is debuting tomorrow. That's correct, right, Dr. Bowen?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so check this out.
Hi, I'm Megan.
And I'm Josh.
And this is Digital Hammurabi. Our aim is to provide easy to understand and reputable scholarly information about the ancient Near East in an entertaining and engaging way. The ancient Near East encompasses the areas known today as Iraq, Iran, Syria, Palestine, Turkey, and Egypt.
Megan and I specialize in the languages and culture of ancient Mesopotamia, modern Iraq and Syria, a field known as Assyriology. We hope that you find the information here both intriguing and educational as we facilitate the dissemination of modern scholarship about the exciting world of the ancient Near East.
Excellent. I think that is the cutest video on the planet. That was an excellent introductory video. So, Dr. Bowen, why don't you explain what you guys are doing and kind of tell us your schedule that you have planned so that people can get excited and go subscribe as soon as we're done after this show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope my mic sounds a little bit better this time. Is there any feedback or anything, Kyle?
No, sounds great.
Very good. Yeah, I guess I just needed to give my mic a little bit of time to evolve.
Oh, nice.
But
Touché, sir. I believe, what sage had that advice? What wise old sage?
I can't remember his name, but I tell you, I thought that the development of my microphone proved evolution to be true, but microphones only produce microphones. So,
oh, that's excellent.
Oh,
well done. Well done. Thank you, Kent Hovind, for these never-ending jokes. That was well played.
Yeah, I thought of that on Wednesday. I've been saving it up now.
He waited all week for that joke.
That happens to me too, though. You get some things in your mind that you just want to say, and you're waiting for the right opportunity, to say. It's like, hey, ask me this.
Yeah. And, no, and I'm really excited actually about the Digital Hammurabi. So, 2 weeks ago when I was on, the idea, I guess, came up that maybe we'd put a channel together, which sounded pretty daunting to me. But my wife is a genius, and she's sort of taken it upon herself to put it all together. And of course, Kyle and Steve have been really helpful. And so Digital Hammurabi is what we're calling it. And my wife came up with that. And I promise that you'll see her face on the videos a lot more than you'll see mine, which I'm sure is quite a relief to your viewing audience here. But no, it'll be really good. So we thought, maybe the way to go about it was to really focus on the biblical angle and the connections with the Bible. And certainly that's going to be a big part of it. But, the ancient Near East, ancient Iraq, it's such a big part of Western culture. And, where we are today really was born there. And so I think thinking more broadly about it is really important. So, there's some major fields that kind of are the staple maybe of ancient Near Eastern studies. So Assyriology, what we do, what Megan and I do, of course, is our favorite. So ancient Akkadian, Sumerian, those sorts of things. But there's also Egyptology. There's archaeology, the ancient Near East. There's, of course, the Hebrew Bible, ancient Near Eastern art history. So, there are a lot of different ways that we can come at this. And of course, we were thinking about it. We know an awful lot of people in the field. And since, we went to Hopkins, and my wife is just about to finish up there in the near term, but we know a lot of young scholars. For example, Dr. Maggie Bryson, Egyptologist, brilliant scholar, and we know a lot of them. So we thought it would be a good idea to sort of tap into that and bring them on as guests, interview them, their latest research, make these connections with the biblical text and with the ancient Near East more broadly. And we also thought it would be kind of cool to do what we're calling daily data, and having sort of like a fun fact Monday through Friday, where we tweet out a cool fact about the ancient Near East, and then we do a corresponding video, maybe 2 or 3 minutes long, where we go into a little bit more detail about that particular fact. So we've got the first 5 recorded, and I don't know, I'm really excited about it because they're interesting. Just as a little teaser, maybe, we have a video about sorry, I don't know if you. I have MS, so I get distracted really easily. So sorry about that.
It's quite.
It happens to me every single show. Like I said, one time I told you that I completely forgot Steve's name.
I forget my name half the time as well. So real quick, while we have a quick reprieve, since we have all the people watching, can I ask the people, take literally 10 seconds. The link to their channel for Digital Hammurabi is in the video description. Click on that and go subscribe to them real quick.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Take 2 minutes to do that. We'll wait. Well, I don't want to get. We can't be demonetized. We're not monetized. Sing it.
Beatbox.
Yeah. Oh, you don't want me to do a beatbox.
See, I think what's good about this is that this is you said you used the good word, I think, untapped. It's something that doesn't really exist kind of in that in its entirety, the way that you're talking about doing, because I think there's a lot of interesting aspects about the ancient world. I, for one, am obsessed with, like I've said many times, I might be on the cuckoo side a little bit, because I think that the Sumerians were key to a civilization that existed before them. That's the one conspiracy theory that I truly subscribe to. But there are other things that are true that you can prove that are, like, we were essentially all created right around that area, like Sumer. That's where, humanity, got its start, right? In the Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent part. That's where we all began.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the cradle of civilization. I don't think there's any question about that. So.
Yeah, so I think you guys are going to be awesome, and just don't forget about us little people when you make it big, okay?
Oh, well, I really appreciate you guys doing this, and I really don't think that. I mean, it's we know some things, but I think just being able to be sort of this liaison between the wider audience and all these young scholars that are in our fields, up and coming, and that's sort of our focus is to bring them on and to say, what's the latest and greatest research that you're doing, and really facilitating that connection. I think it'll be good, and of course you'll get to see my wife a lot. So
we're awesome. Okay with that.
Yeah. So tonight, I believe that we're going to start with some law that you said, some things that were kind of date back to, I guess it would be the first, wouldn't it, on those tablets? Because that's correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the cuneiform tablets, those are the first ever, like, what we have is recorded writings?
That's correct.
Okay. So kind of walk us through what you mean by we're going to kind of touch on the law aspect. Let's start there, and then we're going to kind of go into where I know I made a declaration before before I should have, but we'll get to the flood in a second. Let's start with the law.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe I should preface this a little bit. Assyriology is pretty broad, and there are a lot of connections, obviously, that can be made between Assyriological studies, Akkadian and Sumerian, and the literary, liturgical, administrative, legal texts, and the biblical text. And so, when we first started talking about this, Kyle, you and I started talking about it. It was sort of like, why don't you just come on and we'll kind of see where it goes. And so I sort of sat down over the past 2 weeks and thought, well, what could I talk about? Or at least what could I be ready to talk about? I mean, I didn't put together a presentation or anything, but I read a fair amount on some topics. So, I revisited my dissertation and some of the interesting connections I think that you can make between these lamentational texts and the biblical text. And then I thought it would be kind of cool, we could talk generally maybe about, the book of Exodus, for example, Exodus 20, as an example, and you see the laws that are laid out there. And, certainly they didn't exist in a vacuum. So, we have quite a bit of information that predates the biblical text, the biblical code, if you want to call it that. And, of course, Hammurabi is one of the more famous ones, but there are others that even predate him. So I went back and did, some reading on that to sort of refresh my memory. And again, I don't have a specific presentation. We can kind of talk about it if you like.
Sure. I think a good starting point would be, you hear a lot in debates and some of the discussions that we have. the person on the atheist side will often actually cite Hammurabi's code in various, especially in the morality debates, because people will bring up like the Ten Commandments and those kind of things of how, that's an example of God giving a way for people to behave, and you'll often hear shot right back that no, actually Hammurabi's code was the first establishment of these type of laws. So I guess that would be a good starting point, because you hear it so often, to explain what that is and why that is relevant.
Yeah, and I would say, and I don't think I'm certainly not alone in this. Hammurabi, while it is early, certainly was not the earliest. And I've got my other laptop here on the side, so if you see what I'm doing, that's
sure.
So
do you know offhand what we would say the first?
Yeah, I mean, I think the earliest that we know about to date, the ones that we have evidence for, are called the Laws of Ur-Nammu, and they go back to the late 3rd millennium. Of course, Hammurabi would be 1750 BCE, right around there. So, so we have these. I was just going to read, one or two of them here.
Sure.
And if you've read through the Exodus text, you'll hear sort of the similarities in it. And again, this is the laws of Ur-Nammu, who was a king of the Ur-3 period. If a man commits homicide, they shall kill that man. If a man acts lawlessly, they shall kill that man. If a man detains another, that man shall be imprisoned and shall weigh and deliver 15 shekels of silver. So you can hear it's the same sort of structure that's laid out in Hammurabi's law code. And I put that, every time I say code, by the way, I'm putting that in quotes. And we could talk about that if you like, about why I put that in quotes. And again, it's not my idea. That's certainly.
Yeah, I think that's a good. Let's do that. Why do you put it in quotes like that?
So, I mean, I think there's this idea. I know there's this idea, and I think many people, when they look back and they think about Exodus 20, and you hear about the 613 laws, that are in the Torah, and we call them laws, right? And we think that it's this sort of codified system, like the Napoleonic codified system, where it was meant to be this, form of, jurisprudence where, if you had a case, you could go back and crack the books, as it were, and figure out how do we handle this based on this law code. And of course, many people have written on this. Botero is probably one of the more well-known in his book, Writing, Reasoning, and the Gods, where he has a whole chapter dedicated to this, and it's a phenomenal chapter. But it's not a code, and he's got some. I think makes a very convincing case for that. And we don't have to go into the specific arguments of that, but this, if you've ever seen the Stele of Hammurabi, that the tall black monument stele that has all the codes etched into it, people look at that and they say, oh, that's a law code and that's a law system. Really, when you look at the text, particularly with respect to the prologue and the epilogue that are in that particular text, these are individual cases, and they've been compiled and they've been organized in a way that we don't completely understand. But they're not meant to be exhaustive, right? They're not meant to be this source that the person could go back to and say, I know that based on this crime or based on this thing that's been committed, I can go back and find that particular infraction in this system, this systematic code. Really what we're seeing is Hammurabi, and the same thing with Ur-Nammu and Lipit-Ishtar, other kings before him, and other kings after him, what we're seeing is a collection of their decisions that they made. And the reason that they're bringing them together and organizing them in this way is to not only prove to, I mean, it's difficult to say who they're proving it to, but definitely to prove to the gods, but, you know, probably to a wider audience, that they are a just and righteous king, and they are doing good for the people, and they are enforcing the justice of Shamash, for example, or of Utu, that they're being the righteous judge that the gods require the king to be. And so I think maybe that sounds like a subtle difference, but I think it's really important that we recognize that, because when you come into the biblical text, you know, I think we have to be careful to not rush to judgment that this is some sort of absolute and inclusive system that we can turn to and say any infraction that we see, all we have to do is go back to the Torah and we can find the answer. And I think we have to be careful about jumping to that conclusion.
Is that why it's not considered a code, because it's not exhaustive, and but it does cover for one specific region, right?
Yeah, it covers a region and it covers a time. And the region that I would say it covers can be, really restricted to that region that was being controlled by that particular ruler. And, you know, so we have to be careful. We don't want to talk about this overarching system. And as a matter of fact, 🀭 points out, and again, I encourage your listeners to, if they're interested in this, to go read that chapter of his book. I forgot what I was saying.
The chapter of his book?
Yeah. Sorry, this will happen from time to time.
I would have to rewind. What was the name of the person, if you can remember that?
🀭.
I can't pronounce it correctly.
I would even attempt.
Yeah, I know my limitations.
I can't get historicity correct.
Hysterectomy. Jesus is hysterectomy.
I remember what I was going to say. So even within the laws in that stele of Hammurabi, you don't have consistency in the laws themselves. For example, you'll see earlier, for example, in the code, a judgment that comes out, and then later on, there's a very similar case that comes up, and the penalty is very, very different. And so there's not this internal consistency even to that set of laws themselves, because it wasn't designed to be that, right? Hammurabi's not sitting down with his, the scribe that's going to put this thing together and saying, okay, let's make sure we have our system right. Right, that's not what he's doing. He's just, and we actually find it. He's pulling individual decisions that he's made in his reign, during his reign, and he's just having them written out. Right, so we actually have a legal text that shows a very specific case, and I can't remember all the details of it now, but there's like a traveling businessman that goes and he can't pay to free somebody. And so he has to appeal to the temple, and then I think ultimately to the palace to get the money. And it's something really specific like that. And so we have the actual tablet that has the case. And then if you look at the stele, you can see it's abstracted, but it's if a man is a traveling businessman, so it doesn't have his name. If a man is a traveling businessman and this situation arises in which he has to free a particular person and he can't come up with the money, he will first appeal to the temple for the money, and then if the temple can't provide it, he'll appeal to the palace.
So they use it as kind of like precedents, right? Like we do nowadays. A case would come up that they haven't, seen before, and then extrapolate from that a general type of law that would apply if that case were to come up, in the future.
I think that's what we have to be careful about, because if that's sort of the idea that people would come to this text with, right? That we have these cases that we can look back and appeal to. What I would say is we want to be careful about that, because you would expect that general principles, cases that show general principles, would be sort of the norm. and that's not really what we see in the code. In fact, if you're coming to the code of Hammurabi and trying to create a legal system, it's very difficult to do that. In fact, this would be a little more technical, but Raymond Westbrook, former professor who's since passed away, out at Hopkins, wrote a 2-volume monumental work on ancient Near Eastern legal texts and the legal system, and he wrestles with all of these texts in detail. So, sorry.
But these were jurisprudence type laws, right? These are not, or were they more of a moral type code? Because I've always looked at it this way. I have a problem with there being a moral lawgiver and then basing my morality on that. I think that I have a moral code, and then laws should be based upon a morality. How did Hammurabi accept that? Were these just jurisprudence? Because I don't think they're case law, because case law seems to be implying precedents and how the judicial system looked at the actual arguments and the case itself. That I think would be case law. But how did this code was this just a jurisprudence type code, or was it also a moral code from a moral lawgiver? Was that of a deity or from him himself as a king?
Yeah, I mean, certainly they would see morality is an interesting word. I don't know that I would use that. I don't know that I wouldn't, but I'd have to think about that.
There seems to be some moral issues in the code. I mean,
absolutely, no question. What I wouldn't say is that there was some sort of a moral system that was set, because you can see even from law to law that there's not this well-defined system that they're basing their decisions on. And again, I'm going to be careful as I talk about this. I'm not an expert in this area, right? If you were talking to Raymond Westbrook or people that one of his students or something, and maybe that's something that we'll do on the channel, is bring somebody on to talk about this in detail. But what we don't, I think we want to be careful to say that there was some set moral system behind these laws that was driving these laws. I think that Hammurabi is looking at these cases like any other king was looking at them, and he's making judgments based on
his mood.
I'm sure that happened a lot. But this sort of thing, in other words, I think what we see in the law is a representation of his decisions, not this result of a set moral system behind him that was driving his decisions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I have a question, kind of stemming off of that. So if we're, kind of saying that this was the precursor to what we see in the Bible in Exodus, were these laws, was this code driven in any way by a supernatural being or force, or was this solely what his kind of mood was at the time? Like, was there an external driving force to these? Like the Ten Commandments have and the laws in the Bible obviously have a God driving that that's the motivation for them. So do you see the same in Hammurabi's code, or is this solely a king's view?
Yeah, that's a good question. By the way, sorry for slamming down. I realized as I did it that probably looked very strange to everybody. I have 2 cats, and one of them likes to scratch on the furniture, and that's the only way that I know of to make him not do it. So sorry about that. That probably looked very.
It's actually we have had a Steve. How would you put it? We've had guest cats on this channel probably 4 times. One, a very, very, very notorious incident with a character who will go unnamed, but his cat is infamous now.
That wasn't on this channel. That was on.
Yeah.
But that was after show from this channel. Yeah.
Yeah, that was right. So we're all about cats here. They make all kind of appearances.
And in our podcast, though, every episode I think we've had a dog bark.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
it's like every podcast we've had a dog bark. It's weird.
We've got a thing with animals here. Not
we
a problem.
love animals, so quite all right.
Yeah, I worry about looking, like strange, slamming my fist down. But I've watched G-Man, so I mean, I don't know that I could do anything that would be come up to that
Well
level.
played.
So,
well played.
Yeah, I'm just poking at everybody tonight. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're all right.
No, again, there's no question that the rulers. I mean, if you read, and maybe I'll just scroll down to the prologue here, and we can just, again, I certainly won't read it through, but you can sort of hear what's motivating these rulers when they write these things.
Sure.
And I'm having to scroll for a while, by the way, because I'm having to scroll through all the law codes that predate Hammurabi. And I'm on page 94 of the book. So there's a fair amount.
That's crazy to think that there were that many laws even prior, because you originally, like I said, in debates you hear Hammurabi's name more than anybody. To me, I thought that was the first.
Yeah. I mean, he's got the coolest looking, monument. So
yeah,
while you're looking,
I'm sure that has a lot to do with it.
While you're looking this up, I'm curious: was the code itself more of a retributive or restorative type thing? I mean, like an eye seems to be not really restorative. Obviously, to me it just seems more of a punishment, retribution. So is there any kind of like differentiation in the code between these things of what he was trying to accomplish as far as in terms of theory of justice?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, again, we're sort of leaving my area of expertise. What I can say is that in the laws that Hammurabi sets out, not all men are created equal, right? So you have sort of the higher class citizen. You put out his eye, there's one punishment. But if you put out a lower ranking person's eye, maybe it's just you pay a sum of money. So that there's a sort of distinction that's made. Certainly in these laws, there's the idea of restoring someone to make them whole. So if you steal something from them, at certain points, or if you're I'm trying to think back to individual laws, but if you do something that causes someone else to suffer loss, there definitely is a repaying them X-fold for their loss.
Punitive?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, I would say, is. Again, I'm not a legal expert. But
it's definitely to make them whole. The main thing, yeah. I remember I took one law course in college, that the whole point is to make somebody whole again, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's definitely, I think, seen very clearly in the laws themselves. But as far as why, and I think that's the more for me, that's the important thing to remember about these laws is why is this thing being set down by the king in the first place? Because I think that's a question that we have to answer before we come to the biblical text. Not to say necessarily, and again, I won't say necessarily because I haven't done the research, and it's not my area of specialization. But it's definitely something that we want to keep in mind when we come to the biblical text, because I'll just read a little bit here about why it is that Hammurabi is writing this, for example. Sorry.
While you're finding your place there, let me make one announcement real quick. By the way, guys, if you want, what we're doing now is we're starting a Discord server. The link will be in the description for you to join. It'll be a place for you to kind of continue on these discussions, debates, and just kind of have a general dialogue about the show. So you can meet us on the Discord server after the show tonight, and you can also send any questions that you have for Dr. Bowen to our Twitter or there as well. We'll check both. So
that's great, yeah. So when the god Marduk commanded me to provide just ways for the people of the land in order to attain appropriate behavior, I established truth and justice as the declaration of the land. I enhanced the well-being of the people. At that time, and then he starts into the first law. If a man accuses another man and charges him with homicide, but cannot bring proof against him, his accuser shall be killed.
Whoa.
And the law is, if a man charges another man with practicing witchcraft, but cannot bring proof against him, he who is charged with witchcraft shall go to the divine river ordeal. He shall indeed submit to the divine river ordeal. If the divine river ordeal shall overwhelm him, his accuser shall take full legal possession of his estate. If the divine river ordeal shall clear that man, and should he survive, he who made the charge of witchcraft against him shall be killed. And he who was submitted to the divine river ordeal shall take full legal possession of his accuser's estate.
What is the divine river ordeal?
So that's probably something that, so I'll comment on it in general, but essentially, the river was seen as a god, and so someone being cast into that river, if they drowned, the god was judging them, they were guilty, and of course, if they didn't drown, then the god was clearing them.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a very prominent thing during this period, the Mari period.
Well, that's actually a little bit more fair than the witch trials, because in the witch trials, if you drowned, you were a witch, and if you didn't drown, you used witchcraft to get out of it. So either way, you were screwed.
No way to win that. But there was actually an awful lot. It played a pretty big role, of course, in this period, and so seeing it here early on in the laws is I guess not surprising. But that point that Hammurabi is executing justice on behalf of the deity. One of the deities, the god of justice, Shamash, and Marduk, of course, overarching as the head at this time. So you think about what's behind it, what's motivating him. It's definitely the justice of the gods. I don't think that necessitates a fixed moral or ethical system that they were operating under. But that the impetus for it, or the motivation for it, I think would be certainly to execute the justice of the gods for the people.
So they were polytheistic, correct?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Who if you can, who were their what was the name of their main god? Obviously in most religions you have one that is the overarching ruler of them all. I guess. Did they have one?
So that's a tough question. There's a book written by Oppenheim, a popular book, and he's got a chapter that's called "Why a Mesopotamian Religion Should Not Be Written," and it sort of goes to this question of, you have 3,000 years of history roughly, where you have different parts of Mesopotamia at different times practicing subtle. Different forms, sometimes subtly different forms of Mesopotamian religion. So yes, there definitely is an overarching pantheon. The sky god On, the god of the earth, wind, Enlil, the god of the underground waters, Enki or Ea. And you have a storm god, Adad. There are a lot of different gods. The moon god Nana, the sun god Shamash, all kinds of different gods. But at this point, at least beginning at this stage in Mesopotamian history, Marduk is starting to rise up in the pantheon. He's starting to take more of a supreme role, which is why we see at least early in the first millennium, but probably late in the second, we see Marduk rising to supremacy in texts like Enuma Elish, the one that we were talking about 2 weeks ago, where Marduk, conquers Tiamat and creates the universe, by defeating her. So there's a lot of play, I suppose. There's a lot of flux.
All right, I got to ask one trivia question, because it's the only trivia question I know about this topic. What was the name of the demon that was a Babylonian demon in the movie Exorcist? Because that wasn't Satan that possessed her. It was a demon. Do you know which one?
Was it what? I've never seen it. Would it have been Lilith?
You've never seen Exorcist?
Baal.
Oh, that's one of the greatest movies of all time.
It's got to be Baal.
It wasn't Baal. I'll give you a hint because you know the start with a P.
P.
Yeah.
Is
I mean the live chat? Let's check the live chat. Live chat. Do you guys know what's the name of the demon for The Exorcist?
It was a Babylonian.
It was a Babylonian demon. Yes. If you watch I think the fourth one, they make that very clear because somebody got it right. Tyler got it right. Oh, the Satanist of the group got it right. Pazuzu.
Pazuzu?
Yep, it was Pazuzu.
Pazuzu.
Leave it to a Satanist.
Sounds like a sounds like a car. So let me ask you, this may be an unfair question before we move to the next subject, but why do you think it is that, think of how I want to ask this, why do you think it is that people who are proponents of the Bible and the biblical text, that they completely do not acknowledge that there were these kind of things set forth before that writing was even thought of? You know, like there are, like you said, several different kings who had put forth laws that I think eventually would become what we know of as the laws in the Exodus. Like I said, that might be an unfair question, but I'd just like to have your opinion, since you're an expert on this, on why you think that is.
No, I mean, I think that a lot of people in Christianity, in particular, think that the Bible came from base level. Just wanted to use that, Kyle.
Nice.
Throw that in there.
Nice.
No,
it's going to be a thing before it's done. Base level.
Nothing but from base level. So
yeah.
See, you can tell.
Was that a slam on me? That was a slam on me, wasn't it?
No. Kyle was talking about in last week in one of the videos.
Caitlin? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, remember base level?
Yeah, I was.
We don't want to say nothing. We want to say from base level.
Right. Steve is base level.
I'm base level. I'm about as base level as you get.
Steve is base level.
No, I mean, but I think I talked about this a couple weeks ago when I did that Sunday school presentation where I put the slides up and I had the Epic of Gilgamesh and they thought it was the flood story. I had a guy in the back, I mean, really yelling at me, saying that when I said that the Epic of Gilgamesh and Tablet 11 in the Epic of Gilgamesh predates the biblical text by at least 1,000 years, if not more, probably more. He just said, you're wrong. I mean, you don't know what you're talking about. And I wouldn't say that as far as Assyriology is concerned or ancient Mesopotamia is concerned, that's a difficult piece of trivia. I mean, I think that's, for anybody that's looked into it at all, that's pretty easy to find out. But there's this idea, I think, that one part of the problem is that there's just maybe a willful ignorance.
I was just thinking the same thing. That was my word. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, you asked about King James only the last time we talked, and I said that it's lazy. That the belief of King James only is lazy, and what I meant by that is that it's easier, right? We were talking earlier today about textual criticism and about how you have to compare the manuscripts and try to get back to an original reading, and that stuff is tough, and it's a lot of work, right? And so if you can sort of come up with a system where all you have to do is you have this point in time when all things are right and all things are good, and we can go from that point, particularly if that point is easier to get to, and you don't have to consider all the stuff that's behind it and how maybe it led up to it. I think that for a belief system in particular, it's much easier on the psyche to do that. So with a King James only, for example, you don't have to worry about all this Greek and Hebrew stuff, right? It's not an issue. because all you have to do is God inspired the 1611 and we move on. And so I think for some people, they just don't know. They honestly don't know that there are these other traditions. I think there are other people that kind of put fingers in their ears and close their eyes and say, no, I'll just ignore that and it's not true. And then there are others that they have to acknowledge it. A friend of mine got his PhD from an evangelical school, and I really like him. I obviously won't mention his name, but he's a really great guy. Actually, probably fairly well known. But we've known each other for a while, and I asked him. Actually, I don't want to give away who it is. Anyway, one of the things that he said was, well, we know that the Sumerian flood story, for example, we know that that's just a product of Satan, right? And the actual flood, the actual flood happened, the biblical account of the flood with Noah. And then these other stories are like the competitive stories that Satan has put in to try to make it seem like the original flood didn't happen, because there's confusion and disagreement about the traditions. And so they can accept it, but then just sort of write it out. I guess in the same way that somebody can say that the fossil record is the product of Satan, or gracious, even the product of God's work, that God put it there to test you.
That's a very good point. I think that was well put, because to me, I think I agree in the fact that it's got to be a lot to do with willful ignorance. I mean, you have to be willing to look that kind of thing in the face and say either it's a lie or Satan put it there. I think that's pretty much the genius of whoever created religion, is that you can really get your hooks, sunk in very deep, and people are willing to, turn a blind eye to things that are right there in front of their face. But I mean, when you're in the middle of it, like you are, and you see it with your own eyes, and you're around it every day, and how far it dates back, it's got to be hard for people to be able to, because like going back to the discussion we had 2 weeks ago, you were a chaplain in the or you were touring to be a chaplain, so going from that into this field had to be kind of a bit of a culture shock, I guess.
Oh yeah, and I think that the big thing that happens is either you have an open mind already and you're willing to accept evidence that contradicts what it is that you've held, or you're confronted with so much evidence to the contrary that if you're going to move forward in the field, you have to deal with it and you have to accept it. And I think that's where I was. I mean, I would say that I was an open person to a degree, but I don't think that's what I would say won me over or changed my mind. It was just the preponderance of evidence, and it was just no way to really move forward without saying, I have to completely change how I think about these texts, and it's a difficult thing to go through. There's no question.
It's funny because I remember growing up. I don't know, remember it was the 70s or 80s when I saw them, but do you guys remember Chick Tracts? And that one of the narratives they were putting forth was fossils from Satan, right? But I don't see that as much now. I think if you really have looked at how that narrative was pushed back then, it's not so much pushed anymore, because it has gotten to the point where even most creationists recognize there are fossils, and I think they even think this is a silly argument that Satan put them there. But that has changed over the last couple decades. Have you seen that at all?
I mean, really my exposure to, creation versus evolution, actual debates, where these things are dealt with in any kind of detail, has really been you guys. and watching people.
Well, you're welcome.
You're dwindled to that world. Thank you.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
No. But I mean, listening to things like the flood shook everything up, and then based on density, the fossil record formed very quickly. I mean, if you can give someone, particularly someone that's not an expert in this field, if you can give someone what they could consider a plausible explanation for how this thing got there, you win, right? And you can convince people. And I was there, right? I remember when I pastored the church out in Virginia, there was a guy that, very intelligent guy, who said to me, I think evolution is going to prove to be a good model. And I remember, talking to somebody and saying, well, that's just ridiculous. Of course evolution's not true. Look at Genesis 1. And this person said, well, Josh, the answer is very easy. If you cut down a tree in the Garden of Eden, it would have rings, right? Because apparent age, that's how God created it. And Adam, when he was 3 seconds old, probably looked like he was 30 years old, apparent age, right? And so once you have this plausible explanation, this alternative that you can grab onto, you don't really dig much deeper because you don't have to. So, yep, that's good. I can move on with life. And it really takes either being confronted so much so that you can't move forward. Either in my case, in my career or in my education, I couldn't move forward without really grappling with these things. Or there's just so much information that there's really nothing else that you can do but deal with it. And of course I had the former.
See, I when I hear something like that, I don't think it's plausible, because I think that then channeling denotes a connotation of a more likelihood, right? But I don't think the apparent age called I think it's the Omphalos hypothesis that refer to as, or last Tuesdayism or last Thursdayism, makes no sense to me, right? I mean, granted, it could be, but it's something beyond anything we could ever know for certainty, right? Epistemically. So why even have that kind of explanation for anything? It's a non-explanation for anything.
Yeah. So, and I think the reason is that
but it fit into your ontology, right? You're like, oh,
right.
Well, it's a possible. Yeah, sure, it's possible. So might as well include it and make it a plausible thing rather than, that doesn't really sound like a great explanation to me.
That's right. Yeah, but if if you know this biblical text is the infallible, inspired Word of God, and it's that way in a literal, grammatical, historical hermeneutic. And you have to read the text in that light, and of course you see things that are, I would say you have a flattened genre understanding. That's what it means. That's the truth, no matter how implausible it sounds.
Everything has to fit into that.
That's right. Yeah. And as long as you can have something that you can say, yes, so here is an explanation.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
No matter how tenuous of an explanation is.
That's right.
A non-explanation.
That's well put.
I see that quite frequently, actually.
Yeah. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that people don't know, like you were saying a minute ago, too, that there are stories that predate the ones in the Bible, and that it's highly plausible that those stories in the Bible were obtained by these, various earlier cultures. And one that I think we're going to kind of get into, thankfully you were listening to one of the shows this week where I kind of threw something on you. But the flood, I think that is probably one that in every civilization, I think, even in the Americas, I believe. I was watching something the other day where the Native Americans even had a version of the flood. So I think in almost every civilization that existed has a kind of a narrative that goes along with the flood. And I know that in your specialty, the Sumerians had one. Can you kind of tell us about that? And do you know how much earlier it dated or predated the Noah's Ark in the Bible?
Yeah, I mean, so kind of a tricky question. A dissertation. I mean, a book was just published. I'm assuming it was his dissertation, Chen, 2013. I can't remember the name of the book now, but it's something like Flood Story. I can find it if you guys remind me. Sure. But my friend Caleb was going to write his dissertation from Hopkins. He was going to write his dissertation at one point on the flood narrative. He decided to go another way and do something else, which I think was actually really, really important to the field. Hopefully, I'll be able to get him on the program and interview him because on our channel. But this book, this 2013 book, makes the argument that the Noah flood story, or that particular story that follows that sort of, build the ark because the earth is going to be destroyed, put all the animals on it, that sort of thing, goes back to the old Babylonian period, and no earlier. I don't know, and the old Babylonian period would be 2000 to 1600 roughly, BCE. I haven't read the book through to and analyze the arguments in a way that I would consider that would make me feel comfortable enough to comment on it. But if that's the case, that says something, I think, about this idea that this particular flood story is the flood story that actually happened, historically, and that Satan was able to I can't think of the word.
Use it as a way to deceive.
Yeah, corrupt it. That's the word I'm trying to think of. Corrupt it and create this. If it only goes back to the old Babylonian period, that's significant. That's saying something. But we know that it at least goes back to that date. And there are really 4 texts that I can think of that talk about three primary texts that talk about the flood in some detail with this story outside, of course, of the biblical text. And the 3 main ones I would say are Gilgamesh Tablet 11, which I think probably many people in your listening audience know about already. Exorcist, which again, we have a lot of evidence for it, a lot of tablets, and the Sumerian flood story. So those first 2 texts are in Akkadian, and the Sumerian flood story being Sumerian. We also have the Sumerian king list, which I think we've talked about before a little bit. It talks about when the flood swept over, and that was a really defining point. Much like in the biblical text, you have people that reign for 28,000 years, for example, before the flood, and then after the flood sweeps over, they're not real years, but they get the king's reign for shorter periods of time, significantly shorter periods of time, much like the biblical text. So if you go back through those texts, or if you go through those texts, Exorcist, Gilgamesh Tablet 11, and the Sumerian flood story, a lot of commonalities. And I didn't want to come bring some presentation that would bog this down in detail, but what you have is the gods determine that humanity is making too much noise, or whatever that might mean. That's debated, and they're going to wipe them out. One god in particular has decided he's going to wipe them out. And for example, in Exorcist, you have different attempts by the god to do that, be it through disease going throughout the people, or famine. There's a god, Enki, Ea, that comes and sort of stealthily saves the day, right? And so ultimately, Enlil becomes so frustrated that he says, all right, you gods have to all swear an oath to me that you're not going to help out humanity, because something's going on where they're getting help. So everybody swear to me, and of course all the gods do. But then Ea goes down and whispers to the reed fence, to the wall, and of course on the other side of the wall is the Noah character, Utnapishtim, and he says, "Hey, build a boat, buddy. Rescue yourself." So he keeps his word in the letter of the law, maybe not the spirit of the oath, but and so the Noah character, Utnapishtim or Ziud-Sudra, goes and builds this boat. Of course, I think we talked about this last time, but one of the differences being that it seems like the Noah character is actively trying to save the people, to get them to turn from their sin, and the Utnapishtim or Ziud-Sudra, is being tricky and lying to the people and saying, "Hey, there's been a determination that I can't stay in Enlil's domain anymore here on the earth because I've fallen out of favor." And so Enki has said that Ea has said that I can come down and live with him in the underground waters, so we have to build this boat. And so
sneaky.
And of course this is all Ea's planning, and so the carpenters of the city come and help him, and people bring in ropes and oil and pitch and all these things. And I think I mentioned this last time, but even when the flood comes, you can see the storm coming. He gets somebody to come and seal the hatch from the outside, and he says, "I'll give you all my possessions. I'll give you my house and everything that's in it," because they were under the impression that life was going to go on, and of course it didn't.
What a bastard!
Yeah.
Did he have animals too? Like, is that a similarity in the stories? Did he have to bring like two of each animal, or like Noah?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, the numbers vary, but yes, and of course, we the stories even talk about how at certain points, the animals are brought to Utnapishtim. So, but yeah, he takes him on the ark or on the boat, and something that I was going to say. Oh yeah, as I was rereading through these texts this week, it's almost comical to me that there can be this argument. And again, I understand where the argument's coming from. It's, trying to hold fast to a particular position. But the idea that it was a localized flood in the literary texts, that was the idea in the story, that it was a localized flood, is laughable, in my opinion, because the language is so unbelievably clear, particularly in the Mesopotamian stories, that Enlil comes back at the end and is really pissed off. Hey, how did a human, escape? How did this happen? Right? So it wasn't supposed to be just, we don't like this particular little area, and so we're just going to wipe out these people. This is a worldwide event, and again, I understand the motivation for saying that it was a localized thing, so that it can somehow fit with what people perceive as scientific or archaeological evidence or whatever, geological evidence. But it's certainly not in the text.
Why do you think it is that so many different civilizations have some type of flood story? Where is that stemming from? Because obviously, or you would think that something must have happened for them to even, kind of create this story. Because this seems to be a narrative that goes throughout the ages. There's a common theme that at some point, whether it be local or global, that something happened to kind of spurn this narrative. Do you have any
Yeah, I mean, I would say people build cities, villages, towns on water courses. That's what they do. I think that's why you see the Nile and the Tigris and the Euphrates, having these cities built up, and these water courses shift. And when they shift, they can shift violently. And I think when a waterway overflows its banks, people die. Towns get wiped out, and we see it. We see it particularly in Mesopotamia. I mean, you can see from satellite imagery, you can see ancient waterways, and so when you look at a city like Mari, for example, and Mari is off the Euphrates, originally they thought, well, certainly this can't be ancient. This mound can't be ancient Mari. It's too far from the river. When in fact, if you look at satellite imagery, you can see, it ran right up to it at one point. So, I mean, that would be, again, I don't claim an expertise in worldwide flood narratives, but I would say that's what I would say would make sense, certainly from a Mesopotamian point of view, that floods were a natural occurrence.
Are you familiar with any flood stories from like the other side of the earth, like on the Popol Vuh, part of the Guatemalan culture, that has a flood narrative as well? Only in this case, it wasn't a ship that was built out of wood; it was people were built out of wood. There was a great deluge. There was a trickster type character, Seven Macabre, that would almost be like Satan, obviously. So there was a lot of parallelism. This was like in the 16th century. So even in some region that's as far away as Guatemala, there was very similar stories of a great deluge and all these parallelisms that I probably had even no relationship to the Mesopotamian region, because I don't know if there's any really that much. Was there anybody from yeah, well, probably a little, probably no crossover, but they seem to have developed a very similar type creation story. So is that, you think, something that's just maybe ubiquitous in mankind, that we're going to tend to relate the origin of things by what we observe? And basically, like you said, we see things like the river overflowing. We like to have a hero in a story. There was like two kids. There was a hero on the Popol Vuh. And we like to have a villain. So is that something like just in general cross culture?
Yeah, I mean, that strikes me as reasonable. I've never looked into it, but that seems, given what I know about the Mesopotamian text, that strikes me as reasonable. That we all have similar experiences, and that they seem to recur.
Yeah, totally.
So
I think that probably I don't know if there's any way to tell this for sure, but when you were talking earlier about the polytheistic gods that Sumerians have, I think that probably in some way played a large part to what we saw in Greece with the god of wind and war, and as you name those off, it seems like it started in one localized region and just kind of spread outward, to all these different civilizations. And with that came stories like the flood story and those general laws that seem to be, consistent throughout each type of religion, that all stem from one region of the planet, and that is the Mesopotamian region.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you think about the interplay between Akkadian, Sumerian, and the later biblical text, there was one of the tweets, or the daily data that we're putting out this week. One of the stories is international diplomacy, and I won't spoil it, because I'd like everybody to be intrigued enough by it to go view the video. But
learning the game quickly.
Yeah. But I mean, it's really interesting because, there's a lot of interaction very early on in the ancient Near East. And so this sort of intertextuality that we see, it's not just in Mesopotamian stories and the biblical text. You can see Ugaritic influence, up north on the Mediterranean coast, the city of Ugarit, Ras Shamra, a whole bunch of tablets up there that were written in an alphabetic cuneiform script, which is, one of their main characters is Baal, or Baal, however you guys have heard it pronounced. But so there's a lot of influence on the biblical text. Baal is the rider on the clouds, and there's some debate about that influence. But I think there's something there in the Psalms. Yahweh is called the rider on the clouds, and I think there's some definite intertextuality going on there. To what degree, I think that's debatable, but there's definite interplay and influence throughout the entirety of the region, and so it only follows that you'd have these sorts of similarities, throughout.
Baal is considered to be a demon now, right?
Who is?
Baal. I think he's considered to be in Christianity. He's one of the really bad demons in Catholic.
Beelzebub.
There's
Beelzebub. Hold on, let me see if I can.
I don't remember my demonology for AD&D. Which ones were demons, which ones the devils. But I thought Beelzebub was completely different from Baal.
Well, it's
Is that just like one of those things like Saturn and Hera or Jupiter and?
The word
Zeus
Beelzebub,
kind of
the word Beelzebub is Baal Zavuv. Baal just means Lord, and Zavuv is fly.
This right here says
Beelzebub
that
was Lord of the Flies,
Baal
right?
is he's a 17th century occult writings as one of the 7 princes of hell. He's drawn from the Canaanite deity Baal, mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as the primary god of the Phoenicians. So I guess what they did was take the Phoenicians' god and turn him into one of the 7 princes of hell, according to Wikipedia.
Yeah, Israelite religion, Canaanite religion, is very complicated. People devote their lives to it. And actually, as a shameless plug for one of my old professors, Professor Ted Lewis, within the next, I think the next year and a half, maybe. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But hopefully soon, he's got probably like a 1,000-page book on Israelite religion coming out. And he's just an amazing scholar. And if you have any interest, it's probably going to be a little technical, but he's a very down-to-earth man. And really likable guy. Writes really well, very well published.
Definitely be interested.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think it's going to be a fantastic work, and he's devoted a lot of time to it. But
I think the whole subject, like what you do, fascinates me, especially with it being on the Sumerians, and because I remember something that stuck with me when we first spoke was the fact that when you're going back through and you're reading these tablets, and it's not like what a biblical scholar would have to do with a scroll, that you're getting copies of a copy of a copy. You're actually holding the actual tablet that person at that time wrote, and you can in some cases still see the fingerprints in the tablet. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want. We talked about me doing this. If you think it would be better to go a different direction, that's fine. But we talked about that sort of textual criticism the last time I was on the show, and I mentioned this exercise that I did with a Sunday school class of mine. And
oh yeah, absolutely. Let's do that.
If you want to, we can. I don't know how. I sent you the PDFs. I don't know how it would work. I don't even know if we can put it up on the screen or not.
I can link. What I can do is link it in the Discord and on our website. That would probably be the best way,
Okay.
so that people could actually get it and copy it.
I've got printouts here. I don't know how clear they'll be, but nobody's actually got to read them or anything. But if you can,
what you can do is go through the exercise, and when we get finished here, I'll link the links to where they can actually find the printout. But
okay.
You can give them kind of a general idea of what they'll do with that once they get it.
So if you think about This is the Nestle-Aland 27. It's the sort of the standard Greek New Testament that people in the field use. And the same thing happens. I've just picked this up because it was right on my shelf. The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, has the same thing. And I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, but I'll try it anyway. Down at the bottom, you see you have the Greek text there in the main body, and then at the bottom, you don't have to be able to read it or anything, but you have an apparatus, like footnotes down at the bottom. And basically what that is the people that put this together, if you remember, we were talking the last time that we have like 24,000 manuscripts or something, fragments of the New Testament text. And what they did is they picked one that was really well preserved, and it preserved a lot of the New Testament. And they made that sort of the base text, and they put that essentially in the body, so if you're reading through, that's what you're reading. You're kind of reading that main text. The problem is that there's so many variations. There's so many places where a different word is used, or a different grammatical form is used, or text is deleted, or text is added. And so the way that they chose to represent that is by putting a little mark in the main text as showing you that there's something down in the footnotes. And then you go down to the footnotes, and it tells you this manuscript and this manuscript and this manuscript all read this instead of the word that's in the main text. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I wanted to sort of show, in a very basic way, how we kind of got where we are with the biblical and the Hebrew text. The Greek and the Hebrew text. And if you've ever played that game, I don't know what you call it.
Telephone.
Yeah, telephone. There you go. You whisper something to somebody, and then they turn and whisper to somebody else. It's sort of like that. By the time you get to the end, it's changed pretty drastically. It's not quite like that, but it's similar. The principle's sort of the same. So what I did is I wrote out a letter, and you don't have to be able to see it, but I wrote out a letter, so it wasn't typed out or anything, and I gave the letter to a person and said, copy this, right, so that you can give it to somebody else. And actually, I think I made 4 different copies, 4 different originals, photocopied them, and then gave them to 4 different people and said, now copy this as if you're going to send it to somebody else, right? Because this is what you're doing in the biblical text, right? You're copying it so that it can be used or sent to somebody else, right? So in the text, for example, I wrote, Dear John, I wanted to write and tell you that we, and then I crossed out the word we and wrote I will be coming to your house next Thursday. So, you can imagine a scenario where somebody's writing a letter and they say, yeah, Megan's going to come with me and we're going to go over to this guy's house. And then I write we, and I realize, wait a minute, Megan can't come. So then I put a line through it instead of erasing it, and I write I instead. When I put errors like that in there intentionally. I wrote the word the twice, for example, or I misspelled a word. I wrote weather, W-H-E-T-H-E-R, instead of weather, W-E-A-T-H-E-R. And when I handed that to the person, they had to make decisions as a copyist, right? They had to decide, am I going to take this and copy it out exactly and write the word we and then put a line through it? Or am I just going to not put the word we in? Or am I going to misspell the word weather? Or am I going to spell the word weather correctly?
Interesting.
So at the end, I wrote, I hope it won't be raining cats and frogs, right? Well, that's a very well-known idiom. And so would they write cats and frogs? Or would they write cats and dogs? Would they amend the text? So, and you see some very interesting decisions that people make. anyway, so what I did is I had them copy out my letter, and then I had them give it to 4 other people, and those 4 other people copied out the letter, right? And then they copied it out. They gave it to different people, and 3rd person copied it out. So now I had the original, and I had 3 different copies. Everybody with me so far?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I'm fascinated to hear what it turned out to be.
It was really neat because it was such a small sample, right? I mean, it's such a small sample. And what I did is I marked each manuscript. I marked the original A, and then the first one that people copied B, and then C and D respectively. And I brought them all back, and I don't know if you can see it, but I highlighted, all the places where there were variations.
Let me quick question. Did you give him any kind of guidance on this at all?
No.
Okay.
No, and that's
straight up. Okay, you just said here, copy.
Copy this as if you're going to send it to somebody else.
Gotcha.
And so the thing is, that's what, that's the sort of system that you had in place, right? I mean, like Paul writes a letter, and then that letter has to, and I'm making assumptions for the sake of this argument here, whoever wrote it, if Paul didn't write it, whatever. Sure. Paul writes a letter to the Romans, right? Well, the letter goes out to Rome, and that letter is going to get copied, and maybe it's going to be given to different people so that it can be read by different groups, or maybe it's just going to go into, it goes into the canon, whatever. Even of course, it wouldn't be considered that, but anyway, but it's being copied, right? And so people are making decisions as they copy, and what do they do, and what, not only to correct mistakes or what they consider to be mistakes, but new mistakes are being, or variations are being entered into the text. So what I did is I compiled it all and then typed up manuscript A as the main text here in the body, and then I made my own little apparatus. And I'll just read some of the variations. In manuscripts C and D, if that makes sense, manuscripts A and B have John spelled, Dear John is spelled John. In manuscripts C and D, it's spelled Jon, right? A little variation, but it's a difference. The main text has, let's see. So let me find well, anyway, I'll just kind of go through a couple of them here. I wanted to write and tell you that. In manuscripts C and D, I wanted to write to tell you that. So it's just a change in the syntax, but it's a change, right? At the end, oh no, here's an interesting one, because this happened a fair amount. I wrote in the second paragraph, "What the hell is up with this weather, huh?" Well, in a church, people kind of felt a little anxious about writing "what the hell," right?
Yeah.
So you see sort of a taming of that phrase. So I got manuscripts B and D have "what has been up with," and manuscript C had "what's been up," right? So they're all taking "what the hell" out.
Interesting.
But then there's subtle variations
Anybody
in
change
it.
it to "what the heck"?
No, that would have been cool.
So let me ask you. Was there anybody that copied it exactly, and would you expect them to have copied it exactly? Like you say, let's say you changed "we," you crossed it out, and obviously in the primary manuscript you struck out, right? Now, if I'm copying something and there's a spelling error, nowadays we can just type SIC after
right.
it, so people know that it was in the original manuscript. So, would you expect them to include the "we" with a line out on it and copy it exactly? Was that an expectation? You would expect them to take that out as a copyist and go with the intent of the message, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And so I think what we can, this exercise I think shows us some things that when we then come back to the New Testament, for example, or we come back to the Old Testament text, we can see what decisions are they making, right? What kinds of variations might we expect? And of course, people dedicate their lives to doing textual criticism. but it's sort of doing this exercise makes it clear that it's not so simple as just copy exactly what's there, because in reality, that's not what we would expect, and that's not what we have. The other thing that's really interesting about this exercise is that we know what the autograph was, right? I know because I wrote it. And so I can sort of trace the development, right? So once the first manuscript got rid of what the hell, it wasn't a decision that needed to be made by a later copyist. And
gotcha.
You can see how some of these other variations creep in. And if you were to have 10 different, cycles of copying this thing out, you would see, I think you could see in this sort of an example where it's a very small text, you could probably trace with some accuracy the development, and you could maybe put them even in a chronological order. But we don't have that with the New Testament text or with the biblical, with the Hebrew Bible, right? Because we don't have the autograph. And so, part of the point of the textual criticism, at least of the biblical text, is trying to get back to an original. What is it that actually was put on the paper, right? So in Romans 5:1, do we have let us have peace with God in the subjunctive, where it's unclear what do we have it? It's not an indicative verb, or we have peace with God. And the difference is an omega or an omicron.
Big difference in context.
Yeah, it's the form itself.
Yeah. So these were all single iterations, right? Did you ever take one, instead of having multiple people do it, did you take one person, they would copy it, they would give their copy to somebody else, then give your copy somewhere else, and then see what it's like 10 iterations down the line?
No, I haven't done that, but that would be an interesting experiment, right?
I think it'd be a completely different message. I mean,
I think you're right, and but it's sort of, if your listeners do this, or just look at it based on what I just explained, it'll make so much more sense when you come back to thinking about the issue of what did the Bible originally say? What did the book originally say? Because I think there's this idea that there are these minor little things that we have to sort of sort out, but but really it's actually pretty straightforward. In reality, it's not so simple. And there are some, from a theological standpoint, if you're dealing with New Testament theology, the difference between having been justified by faith, we have peace with God, is very different from having been justified by faith, let us have peace with God. Those are very different ideas, and so I thought.
You said we don't have an original that we can go back to check that, right? Yeah. Why do you think? This is probably a really dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just because I'm curious. If you had the Sumerians who were smart enough to put these things, kind of in tablet form, why did they not do that with the Bible? Yeah, or maybe they did.
I mean, so I don't know if smart enough would be the right way to say that. Certainly, we know that people in Mesopotamia wrote on things other than clay. We have wax boards, for example, that they used, and we actually have some that were preserved in a shipwreck, which is pretty cool. But I should probably make that one of our tweets. Sorry, Megan's walking up, and I think there's still that 10-second delay. So I think
hi, Megan.
Mouth moving. She's nodding. Yes, I have no idea what you're talking about.
She's camera shy now.
But so we know that they wrote on things other than clay. Of course, the thing about Mesopotamia is that clay is sort of ubiquitous, right? So it's pretty hard to make other forms of media, right? It takes a lot more work. Whereas if you can, if you can pick up some clay and maybe form it and then impress a stylus into it, that's pretty quick, relatively speaking. And so I think it's probably just the accident of preservation, perhaps. That's probably not a good way to describe it, but
it's what they had to work with.
Yeah, it's what they had to work with, and I'm really happy, obviously, that they did.
Yeah. You don't have this kind of problem tracing it back. That's the actual first. There's no, mistranscribing that, I guess, because it's there in hardback form, literally.
Yeah, the problem that we face as far as textual criticism is concerned with Sumerian texts, for example. My advisor wrote a book on textual criticism of Sumerian literary texts. Is not so much knowing what the scribe put down on that tablet, because we know it, right? But it's more of a question of what was it involves oral tradition at that point. Like what led to this particular story. And of course, we don't have every example of every tablet that was ever created. And so, you have to take the contemporary variations that exist when these scribes wrote these things and try to, maybe identify which variations are intentional, which ones are unintentional. It's actually really fascinating, but it's a very different set of problems.
Yeah.
So you think that's what leads to the problem when people take the Bible so literally, when obviously most of these things started as an oral tradition, and there's been so many different iterations, so many different scribes. I think it was 60 to 66 different scribes and people that have written in the Bible. So, I mean, when people say now that the Bible is the inerrant Word of God, I don't know how they can rationally think that way. Now, granted, the message itself, I can understand the argument. The message of the Bible is inerrant. I can at least phantom that. But I can't see the argument that the actual text itself is the original intent of the creator, because of so many people have been involved in the different iterations it has.
Yeah, I mean, I think then when you look at doctrinal statements, for example, it's very common to see in evangelical circles the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God in its original autographs. Right, and that's where they that's how you deal with that issue. I don't think any reputable evangelical scholar would pick up the Nestle 127 and say, this, or even the English, especially the English translation of that, and say this is the inspired Word of God. What they would say is that if we could get back to the autograph, that's the inspired Word of God, and we're trying to piece our way back to it.
But nobody has that, right?
That's right. Nobody has it. So it's sort of, it's trying to figure out, do you go with, for example, let's take that Romans 5:1 example. Do we have peace with God, or is it in the indicative or in the subjunctive? Do you go with the majority? Do you look at what most of the manuscripts have? If there are 100 manuscripts and 95 of them have an omicron there, which would indicate the indicative, do we go with that? Or do we go with the 5 manuscripts that have an omega, which make it a subjunctive?
Do you not go by the oldest?
Well, no. So it's problematic you would think that, right? You would just go with the oldest one because it gets back closest to the original, but that's not necessarily the case. For example, if you have something from, let's say, 400 AD or CE, that may have been copied 6 times before it got to 400. And if you have something from 500, maybe there's just one copy that was in between the autograph and that copy. So it's the point. Yeah, it's very complex.
Makes sense, right? Well, textual criticism is a very difficult field.
I can, if the listeners or if you guys want any of the things that I talk about, I can get you secondary literature on. I can get you the resources.
Putting links in the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh, you can hear me now.
Oh, look at that!
Yeah,
look at that.
She's got a cover, man.
This is why you're a power couple. By the way, hi, Megan.
He said hi. You'll hear it in 10 seconds.
By the way, this is literally like the fastest hour and 45 minutes that we have.
Good grief.
Yeah. We try to stick.
I love this topic. I don't know why. I have no experience in this field at all, like zero.
Well, I have to have you guys on the show.
Oh, we will be happy to. I was just getting ready to say we're going to have you back now to finish, because we didn't even get to the bulk part, which is your dissertation, which I think it will be its own show in itself.
It's like 600 pages long or something like that.
Yeah. So now you have to come back. Sorry. That's just
it's great. I love hanging out with you guys.
Well,
it's fun.
we quintupled your sub count, but we can still do better because you only had 5 to begin with. So make sure that we're taking their YouTube channel, tweet it out, put it on G+, put it on Facebook.
Absolutely.
I mean, don't just subscribe. Let other people know about it as well, because that's how these channels do grow. So if you've subscribed, go back, take that link, throw it on your G+, throw it on your Facebook, throw it on Twitter especially, because I'm a big fan of Twitter now. But any social media. So let's get that out there. We could easily get them up to 100 by the end of the day. Come on.
This will be a fantastic channel. I promise you guys, fantastic. And we always leave the last 15 minutes usually for questions. And I believe I have 2 that I've gotten right off the top. Steve, did you have any more?
No, I gave you those 2.
Okay. The first one, Dr. Bowen, is there any archaeological evidence that the Malachites or Canaanites ever sacrificed children to their gods? That's a very dark question.
Yeah, actually, so I'm gonna not answer that myself. Somebody just published a book on this, good friend of mine, on child sacrifice, and oh Lord,
is he sad now? That seems like that would make you a very sad person to research all of that.
I would be. Heath Durrell. Sorry, I was trying to think of his name. Dr. Durrell. Let me look up the title of the book.
Sure. And while you do that, guys, while he's looking up the title, go subscribe to Digital Hammurabi if you have not. We're looking. Go subscribe.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate that. Megan does too.
Yeah. It's going to be. I mean, you guys are a good team, and I think it's going to be a really, really good channel. Because, like me and Steve said, this has literally been the quickest hour and 45 minutes that we've had. We've had some shows that have dragged where we're both looking at the clock like, why is it not?
Why is this not done?
Why have we not hit our time?
Oh my God, clock!
We got to get G-Man back in here. That's what you're saying.
He has not been on here.
And we generally know when channels will be doing successfully and when there's going to be followers and subscribers. I mean, most of the people that have been around, they all started at the same boat. We started at 0. People that have come to the community at 100 now have like 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 subs. So people do get subs very quickly if as long as there's content being produced on it. By the way, I think that the biggest thing is people love your wife's accent. So got to have her more on. It's just
also her face.
She's adorable. Yeah, so it's enchanting. So yeah, definitely. I think
the key too is consistency.
Yeah.
If you do Monday through Friday and people expect it, then that's the thing that keeps them, coming back for more, because they know when, it's a Tuesday. That means they're coming up with a new video. So people look out for that kind of thing for sure.
And I love that name, Digital Hammurabi. That's really good.
I tried to get them to call it. The Sumerian language is written in cuneiform, so I tried to get them to call it cutiform.
Yeah, I thought that was cute too, but. Digital Hammurabi.
Yeah, they're super cute.
Cute.
It's really sweet, guys. I appreciate it.
No,
and one of the things that Megan and I are doing is we've talked to many of our colleagues in the field, particularly the young colleagues. These people that are, these academics that are, fresh on the scene and have
passionate.
A lot to offer, and. We've got several people that are just really excited to come on. And so I'm not sure. I think next Saturday, I should probably not say, but we're definitely doing something next weekend. I don't know.
Interviewing you, dear heart.
Oh, she's saying that you're interviewing me. Oh, that'll be nice and exciting. No, I'm sure she'll explain that to me later.
We'll have a universal type calendar, by the way. So a lot of people, there's so many different shows and stuff like that. We try not to overlap. We try not to step on anybody.
Yeah.
Ours pretty much have been consistent. It's 8 o'clock Eastern for the most part.
Yeah.
But sometimes we'll change a little bit. But like Kyle said, I think the key is having that consistency of what day, what time.
And I'll tell you, at this stage, one of the things that, and I'd like to keep this going throughout. If your listeners have things that you want us to talk about, boy, I'd be very excited to do that.
On that note, can I break in? Because
yes,
some of the
please.
listeners have asked to see a cat.
Oh,
break in, girl.
This is Pond.
Oh, kitty.
Excellent. That is a pretty cat.
See, that's not a scared cat. G-Man's cat was frightened all to hell. That's the difference.
Yeah, he has no fear.
He's an idiot.
Most cats don't.
Yeah, he's also huge, and
I was going to say that's a big cat.
That was a big cat. Yeah,
it's like a tiger.
But please, if you if your listeners or you guys have things that you'd really just love to hear about, email us, tweet us. I think you can tweet me, right? I mean, like,
yeah, and you have all that information on your page as well, right? On your YouTube channel, it's all right there if people want to like subscribe to your Twitter and all that.
In the about section.
Yeah.
But we do the same thing, and you'll be surprised at how many ideas that you do get. I was anyway. Like I get at least one a day, and we do follow up on every single one of them. Like Dr. Maggie Bryson, who's coming on Thursday. That was actually 4 or 5 people were asking for, and it followed your show. A couple of them mentioned you, but it stemmed off of this kind of talk, trying to go into that direction of ancient history. So I think there's a large audience out there for that because there's, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to find out these little things about history and where kind of some of the things that we deal with today stemmed from.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And we haven't forgotten about the people that have emailed us, by the way. We were backlog. We're booked for quite a while, so we have so many people that have emailed us that we have kind of touched base with. We haven't forgotten about anybody, but there's only so many days in the week kind of thing.
We will get you, I promise. Yeah. I promise.
Well, so keep sending us those things. What's that?
I'll tell you, just to talk about Dr. Bryson for a second. I mean, she's a brilliant scholar. I excavated with her in 2010 in Syria. And she's excavated in Egypt. I'm sure she'll talk about all this, but really utilize her when she comes on because she's very, very knowledgeable. And
I'm stoked.
Yeah, and not just in Egyptology. She probably won't like that I'm saying this. Sorry, Maggie, but she's so well rounded. She's a real asset. I think your listeners will really enjoy hearing her.
I'm excited to hear about the Sphinx. That's what I have my own little theory about the Sphinx, obviously, but I can't wait to hear if I either sound absolutely batshit crazy or if there might be some truth.
I do remember something along the lines like in one of the paws there was supposed to be like a door that led to like the Library of Alexandria type something or other. I mean, have you ever heard something?
I'm not that crazy.
Yeah, I remember reading about something like that at one time, and of course I just don't buy it, but yeah, there's some really weird ideas out there. How about this one?
I think it's older than it is, and I think that the marks that you see on it are not what they say, which is the desert sounds, but water erosion.
So I thought it went back to like 10,500 BC. I thought
it's older than it's older than that they claim it is. I will guarantee you that.
And then, like, if you look at like the pyramids on the Giza Plateau with the Orion's Belt and Leo and Sphinx. There might be some correlation there, but I have not looked in enough to even validate.
They're 0.0003% off from being true north. I mean, that's how.
There's definitely some alignment things. Yeah, I'm not going to discount that.
And how do you do that? If you don't have
magic, I don't know.
See, we're getting crazy now.
That's all right.
We're getting crazy, but there is something to the Sphinx. And I'm hoping that she doesn't tell me that I'm absolutely crazy.
Right. No, well, I'll be interested to hear. Yeah,
it's a petrified real lion. I mean, have you ever seen there's videos out there now? Go check this out. I'm not making this up. There's videos out there now where people will actually drive by mountain ranges and look for like faces and things of that nature, like pareidolia, and then they'll say, "Oh, this is an ancient Titan that has been been, encapsulated in rock. And so these videos out there going, oh, look at all these old, ancient titans that are just resting. And
there's one in Pakistan.
And they have like 5,000 and 6,000 views and 10,000 views. And the comments are like, this is beautiful. This is, proves flat earth. This proves young earth creationism. It's bizarre.
Right?
No. Not everything
so
goes back to flat earth.
I've never seen that before. I just ran across it the other day. These stone titans that people are saying that exist in the mountain range.
This is why you can't discuss conspiracy theories, because always every single one of them always go back to flat earth. Single one of them.
It really does. Or worse, actually goes. I think goes back to younger. It goes back to the ideology at some point. Yeah.
No, people, listen. Not everything goes back to those two things. Not everything.
Somebody says
things are independent.
They said the Sphinx is the doorway to the flat Earth. There we go. We're done.
Right, we're gonna get back on the rails here. I promise. We have one final question.
It happens at the end of every show.
Let me read, if you want me to, Dr. Durrell's book on child sacrifice in ancient Israel, and you can get it at Eyes and Bronze, the website that I mentioned last time.
Okay.
But yeah, it's excellent. He taught me Akkadian, so grammar. So
I tell you what, if you remember, send me the link to that, and I'll link it up to the description.
Beautiful.
We can do that later on. Okay. Were Joshua not a Christian, would any of his Assyriology studies lead him to consider believing any of their theologies?
I mean, no. In short, and I think there are. It's not unprecedented that somebody would adhere to some degree to Mesopotamian religion in the modern era.
Well, that's still going on, you think? Like, do you think there are actually people who still believe in those gods that are listed in the those tablets?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I think, for me, I think if Mesopotamian literary and liturgical texts do anything for me from a spiritual standpoint, is that they might point toward interaction with the divine, right? And I think at that level, what you're seeing are different communities of people that are wrestling with what they consider to be spirituality, right, and the divine. And if in fact that exists, I just think this would be considered evidence for that. But again, I think you'd have to, from a subjective standpoint, presuppose or come to the conclusion subjectively that that the divine exists, and that's what I would use it for, if that makes sense.
Can one last question? Very, very simple question. Can you say one curse word in some weird language?
Good question.
Yeah,
I actually like that question. That's why I had to get in there.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
So when I was at Hopkins in the Hebrew class, I think it was in Ezekiel. We were going through Ezekiel. There's a construction in Hebrew that starts off with the word im, and it seems like it's just a dependent clause, right? It's not actually a full sentence, and the sentences will be like, "If I do not do this," period. And it's an oath / curse formula, right? And what it means is, if I do not adhere to this contract, for example, may the gods curse me, may Yahweh kill me, whatever. There's the implied. And so my friend Caleb, I hope he doesn't hate me for saying this, but it was just so funny. we were in class, and it came his turn to translate, and he had one of these curse formulas, and we always struggled with how do you say that? Because if you just do it, woodenly, you'll say, "If I do not adhere to this contract," which is kind of lame. So it came to him. He said, "I'll be damned if I don't adhere to this contract," and it was so unexpected. And of course, that's so light from a cursing standpoint, but it was so perfect, and it was my favorite curse word story, I think, in all of my linguistic training. I'll be damned if I don't adhere to this contract. And it captured, I think, precisely exactly what the Hebrew is trying to say.
What's the word?
It's not so much a word. Im means if. So, okay. And that starts the sentence or the phrase, if I do not do this, and then it ends.
Did the Hebrews actually have any kind of invective or pejoratives actually as a curse word? I know like goyim might be considered to be sometimes to be pejorative, I guess. But is there anything that they would like if I wanted to say like literally, screw you kind of thing? Did they have any kind of invective for that?
Yeah, I mean they almost certainly did. I can't think of what it would be. I don't know that.
That's a good thing for you to do a video on.
There you go.
Yeah, Hebrew invectives. There you go.
Yeah.
So guys, you have to pay attention to Digital Hammurabi to get the answer to that question.
There you go. See, at any of these questions that you could ask me, I could say, "Oh, I know the answer to that, but I'm not going to say it. We're going to put it out in the video." And then I could just scramble back and do the research and find it out, and you'd never know.
Do what Hovind does. Well, I know the answer, but why don't you tell everybody else for us?
Right. That's always good.
I love that. It's like, yeah, of course I know the answer, but you know what? For the rest of the plebs up there that don't know anything about this, why don't you tell them?
But he just doesn't think that we can catch that. He doesn't think that. But Dr. Bowen, thank you as always for joining us. Like I said, we're going to have you come back on because we got to half of what we were going to originally talk about. That is a quick 2 hours that flies by, but that means it is a very interesting topic. And
so much fun talking about this stuff with you guys. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
And we'll definitely try to get you some subs. We're going to try to tweet all that stuff out, and we're going to keep pushing people to tweet out your particular YouTube channel. So we got you. You have 33 now, so that's not too bad.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And guys, remember that now the Non-Sequitur Show Discord will be open. It is a place where you guys can go and kind of continue this conversation. We'll each episode will give the guests that we have on the link that they have their own section to where they can kind of interact if they want to after the show. And you can continue the conversation. There are different channels on there for atheism, morality, theist versus atheist, flat earth, anti-vax. We tried to kind of give you guys a channel for everything so you can go on there and kind of hash it out. So go check it out. Interact with everybody. For our Patreons, you have your own section, too, that you can contact me or Steve directly, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Other than that, just join us tomorrow with Pastor Darren for Ask a Satanist. It's a special holiday in the Church of Satan. So
one that nobody can pronounce.
It starts with a W. I know that, but after that is anybody's guess. So it's something when even Steve can't pronounce it or won't even attempt it.
I won't even attempt it. Won't even attempt this word. Although I know it's a patron saint or some kind, but yeah. Not going to do it.
But join us for that. Bring your questions, and we'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock.
Good night.